Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 25th chapter of Inheritance, written by A's for Amy 71 on AO3. Villains are attacking! How will the USJ incident play out in this universe? We won't find out until after the trigger warning, so let's get to them. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. Izuku is forced to think fast to survive the USJ. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 25. Izuku barely had time to dodge as a tendril of blackness appeared in front of him while a whirlwind of blackness began to churn around them. He barely managed to push Ida and Uraraka, who were standing side by side, out of the way of the spinning warp gate in the process. Izuku saw that Shoji had dropped to his knees, covering at least two others with his webbed limbs, and Ida had quickly grabbed 13 by the back of their costume and rocketed out of the way, as soon as he realized what was happening. Everyone else vanished. Izuku told himself to not hyperventilate when he saw most of his class disappear. He reminded himself that Kurogiri only transported people to other places, so unless he moved them directly over an active volcano or something, they had a chance of being okay. For now, he had to worry about what was happening in front of him. The warp gate had vanished, and along with it Kurogiri, at least for now. 13 and Ida were standing, braced for whatever might happen next. Shoji stood to reveal that he had been shielding Sero and Mina, and Uraraka was dazed but fine. If they think they've got a way to beat All Might, then there's only one thing we can do, Izuku said to the remaining group. Yes, 13 agreed. Find a way to escape and get more help. Izuku knew they were right, but he also knew that it wouldn't be as simple as that. They were now as outnumbered as Aizawa-sensei, who was still battling his way to Shigaraki down in the atrium. He might hold his own against the other villains, but Shigaraki was a whole other level of evil. He needed backup, and soon. These doors are shut tight, and I don't think my acid can melt through them that fast, Mina said, inspecting the sealed entry. I bet me and Shoji could pry them open, Izuku said. If we can get them open for long enough for Ida to get through. He's the fastest and could run back to the school for help. 13 approved the plan, but lamented that the doors would automatically close once he and Shoji let go. You'll have to maneuver yourselves out after everyone else goes through. Izuku and Shoji nodded in understanding before getting a grip on the seam between the doors. They were on the count of 2 out of 3 before pulling when Kurogiri appeared again. Sero! Izuku shouted. He has some kind of collar, so he must have a body somewhere in there. Let me handle this, 13 shouted, pushing a ready Sero behind them. You get Ida and the others out. 13 activated Black Hole while Izuku charged up One for All. Sparks of green and red traced over his skin, and he and Shoji pulled the doors open just enough to let Ida slip through. Run as fast as you can, Ida! Uraraka shouted, slipping through the gap behind him. Mina followed, as did Sero. Izuku slid sideways to brace his back against the opposite door and his feet against the other, holding it open for Shoji to duck through. I'm going to yank you out, Shoji told him as he got hold of his feet. Just then, 13 screamed, and Izuku saw a portal opening behind them, as well as in front. Their own quirk was being used against them by swallowing their hand with the frontal portal, making it reappear behind. Using his agility, Izuku spun out of the door gap and back into the USJ, letting the door slam closed, leaving the others on the outside. Thinking quickly, Izuku sped to the portal behind 13 and closed the cap on the glove, effectively shutting off their quirk. But the damage was done. 13 fell to their knees and then face down on the ground, a gaping hole in the back of their suit and their back. Izuku only just had time to check for a pulse, which was barely there, before Kurogiri enveloped him in a warp gate and moved him away. It was almost instantaneous. Izuku fell from a few feet in the air to the ground, springing to his feet to see he was in the atrium, beside a fountain. He could see the steps leading up to where he had just been standing, and Aizawa making headway through the crowd of villains advancing on him. Izuku prayed he was far enough away from 13, so his quirk didn't weaken them any further than their injury already had, and that his own quirk hadn't made them. He forced his mind away from that thought, and made himself focus. He scanned his surroundings to find his best course of action. He really wanted to get back to the entrance to try and help 13. That wound had been troubling, possibly fatal. Since he couldn't risk close proximity to her, he needed to get Aizawa to help her. That had to be his first priority, even though Aizawa was also fighting for his life. At least he was still on his feet and not bearing any serious-looking injuries.
You what?
Shigaraki snarled from closer than Izuku had realized.
If you were not transport out of here, I'd turn you to dust right now.
He saw that Kurogiri had materialized next to Shigaraki and was talking to him.
Well, that game's over then. If the kids reach help, not only will All Might come, but so will the rest of UA staff,
Shigaraki was saying, scratching horribly at his neck. Izuku couldn't believe his luck. Were they just going to leave?
We better make sure at least a few of the students die, and their teacher, Shigaraki decided. Nomu, after you take care of Eraserhead, grab Midoriya. He's coming with us. Don't kill him yet.
In the blink of an eye, a hulking black villain that Izuku had assumed was there to protect Shigaraki was suddenly in front of Aizawa, with a single fist on top of his head. Nomu sent the hero crashing to the ground, where he lay utterly still. It was impossible for Izuku to tell if he was still alive as he cried out, "Sensei!" He had just launched himself at the villain when it turned towards him, and it moved so fast that Izuku felt its arms scrape against his own as they passed each other. The villain was grotesque looking, with an exposed pink brain with eyes sunken into the sides of it, and a beak like a bird, if birds had sharp teeth. It had human-looking hands and feet, but the skin was black and looked torn open in areas as if stretch marks had burst from being stretched too far. Izuku planted himself in front of Aizawa, facing this Nomu, and held his ground.
Don't you like my Nomu?
Shigaraki asked Izuku, spreading his arms wide.
Sensei had made him just for me. But that wouldn't have been possible without your help.
Izuku wasn't sure what he was talking about, and didn't have time to examine the dread pooling in the pit of his stomach as he was forced to jump away from the Nomu to avoid being grabbed. That was fine. If it was chasing him, it wouldn't have time to finish off Aizawa, who had a very faint rise and fall to his back. He also needed to get away from Aizawa himself in case his injuries were potentially fatal. Izuku needed to stall for time. Surely Ida would reach the school quickly since it had only been about a 5-minute bus trip. He only needed to evade until help arrived. How long had it been since he'd helped others get out of here? One for all thrummed in his bones as he launched himself away. He jumped high in the air with his levitation paired with his strength. It wasn't really flying, but it was close enough for now. The trouble would be keeping momentum and speed. He wondered if the conflagration zone would be the best place to lead the monster. His own costume featured fire resistance and his mask had a filter for smoke. Maybe the fire would be too much for it, and it could be slowed down. He reached the far wall by the entrance and ricocheted off it like a pinball in a pachinko machine, shooting himself towards the dome at the far side of the USJ that was painted with flames. The Nomu was in pursuit, but Izuku seemed to be able to stay ahead of it so far. Would the roof of the conflagration zone be too hot to land on? He was about to find out! As he got within 3 meters of the side of the dome in his descent, he tucked his knees to flip over so he could hit the building feet first. The force of his landing didn't break the panel as he'd hoped, and Izuku slid down the side of the building until he was on the ground. Luckily, the answer to his earlier internal question was no. The surface of the dome wasn't hot at all, and was probably super insulated. The impact of the Nomu, however, did break the panel, and it plunged through the hole it had created. A few moments later, it crashed back out from the inside, smoking and covered in blisters that appeared right before Izuku's eyes. Healing or regenerating quirk? Izuku groaned. That complicated things. He thought it was super strength or speed, but there was no mistaking the instant healing he was seeing. Unless he had multiple quirks. Then it sunk in.
Sensei had made him just for me, but that wouldn't have been possible without your help.
Crap. The Nomu lunged for him again. Izuku levitated with a leap using One for All and launched himself by shoving off at an angle against the ceiling. He bounced around the USJ that way for some time, with quite a few narrow misses. Apparently tired of the game, Shigaraki called the Nomu back to him. Izuku froze, unable to hear what the villain was saying to the Nomu, but it wasn't hard to figure out. The behemoth sped over to Aizawa and lifted both his arms over its head, preparing to slam them down onto Izuku's teacher. No! Izuku didn't even realize he was moving until he was already halfway across the USJ and to his teacher. At the last moment, the Nomu turned and snatched Izuku right out of the air by his arm and held him firm, even as Izuku did everything he could to get free, including kicking the monster's elbow in an attempt to break the arm long enough to loosen his grip. It was no use. The Nomu delivered a brutal kick to Aizawa's side and sent him tumbling across the atrium, all the way down to the base of the steps, just meters below where 13 was knocked out. Aizawa had left a pool of blood where he had been before the kick, right around where his head had rested in a dent in the ground. Izuku wondered what happened to him while he had been leading the Nomu in the world's most terrifying game of tag.
Well, at least we got the kid, Shigaraki said with a sigh. We'll have to be satisfied.
Just then, the door to the USJ exploded inward, and All Might in his hero form stood silhouetted for a moment in the entrance as he took in what was happening. Fear not! I am here! All Might spotted Izuku dangling from the Nomu's arm and gritted his teeth, looking as wild and angry as Izuku had ever seen him. It wasn't a smile, it was a rictus of seething rage. Preying on children! Izuku watched along with Shigaraki and the classmates who had shuffled back in behind All Might as the number 1 hero ripped the tie from his neck and tossed the shreds away. He looked down at 13, who was quickly surrounded by Shoji, Mina, and Uraraka, hoping to help in some way. With a single bound, All Might had swept away anyone remaining around Aizawa and gently picked him up. The sensei hung limply in his giant hands, blood dripping from his head and arms. All Might turned and spoke to Shoji, who hurried down the steps and gathered Aizawa in his many arms and began to carry him back up. All Might continued to walk towards Shigaraki, with intent written in every line of his body. Shigaraki didn't look concerned, though.
"Stop right there, All Might," Shigaraki called out, "unless you want to see this boy's arm ripped off."
All Might halted in his tracks, huge hands fisted. "I'm sorry, All Might," Izuku said, even as he continued to struggle. "I wasn't fast enough." Almost the moment the words were out of his mouth, a huge surge of ice encased the Nomu, leaving just its hand free, with Izuku dangling from it. Todoroki stepped from the shadows and also attempted to free Shigaraki, but the villain was too fast. In an instant, Izuku used One for All to punch the ice as hard as he could with his free hand, right where the Nomu's arm jutted out, and the hand actually broke away from the arm and let Izuku drop to the floor. "Gah!" he said as he pried the horrifying severed hand from his wrist. "Ew!" Almost instantly, a new hand replaced the old on the Nomu's arm, but Izuku had backed away by then to stand beside Todoroki. "Thanks," he said as they both stood at the ready. "You boys, get out of here!" All Might ordered, even as the Nomu broke free of the ice. Too fast for any of them to register the movement, All Might had moved to the edge of the shipwreck zone to scoop up Asui and Mineta, who had apparently been hiding there. He placed them down near the stairs and ordered them to retreat and help with 13 and Aizawa. Izuku didn't move from his spot, and neither did Todoroki. There was no way either of them was going to turn their backs on the villains. The only reason Izuku even turned his head was because he sensed someone approaching from behind. He was about to deliver a blow to their would-be assailant when Uraraka whispered to him.
"Are either of you hurt?"
He put his fist down and noticed that she and Sero had sneaked over to check on them. "I'm fine," Todoroki said in his usual bland tone. "I'm okay," Izuku said as well, turning his gaze back to the villains. The now free Nomu was still standing beside Shigaraki, and Kurogiri was behind them both, awaiting instruction.
"I'm pretty sure your arm is broken, dude," Sero told Izuku.
Izuku looked to where his arm was bent at a slightly unnatural angle with some surprise. "Tape it for me, quick!" Izuku said, snapping his gaze back to the standoff between All Might and the rest.
"Kirishima just showed up at the bottom of the stairs, and I see Yaoyorozu and Jiro too,"
Uraraka told them with relief. She took hold of Izuku's injured arm and held it steady while Sero used some tape from his elbow to wrap it snugly over his sleeve.
"Kurogiri, bring me the kid. Nomu, kill All Might," Shigaraki ordered.
Izuku had to tear his eyes from the Nomu as he charged All Might because Kurogiri had appeared in front of them. Seeing the collar on the villain again, Izuku knew they had a chance and spoke quickly as he dodged. "If he can wear a collar, he probably has a body," he told the others. "That means we can bring him down." Todoroki tried ice, but it vanished into the blackness of the portal without impact. Izuku levitated upwards to take the attention away from his classmates, which gave Uraraka time to sneak up behind him and use her quirk on the collar and the blackness above it. Sero then stepped forward to shoot his tape, adhering it to the metal collar around where they presumed Kurogiri's neck would be. It was hard to tell with all the flailing, but Kurogiri now looked something like an amorphous black balloon, being whipped around in the suddenly strong wind being generated by the Nomu and All Might trading blows at an unbelievable pace. "You should get out of here," Todoroki told Izuku. "They're kind of trying to kidnap you." Izuku knew he was right, but he also knew that All Might only had so much power left before he was out of time. If this didn't end quickly, All Might already had steam rising from his body, though it was disguised by the flying dust and debris. He also knew that he couldn't go near the exit because Aizawa and 13 were critically injured there. Without giving himself time to think about it, Izuku jumped high into the air with help of levitation and kicked off of the dome overhead to speed downwards like a missile, pulling back his uninjured fist and slamming it forward straight into the Nomu's exposed brain. At the same moment that the Nomu was stunned from Izuku's blow, All Might shouted, "Plus Ultra!" The finishing blow All Might had meant to deliver hit the Nomu square in the chest. The force of the blow sent the Nomu flying into the air, and the wind it caused sent Izuku flying as well. Izuku flailed, twisting, trying to get his bearings, thinking he'd springboard off of the dome again to land safely on the ground. That would have been what happened, except for the fact that All Might had hit the Nomu so hard that the panel of the dome that was the USJ shattered, and Izuku was left with nothing to springboard off of. He flew out the window along with the Nomu, who was nothing more at this point than a giant, grotesque ragdoll. A sudden jolt stopped Izuku abruptly, and he began to fall toward the ground, though he would likely hit the dome first. He looked at his leg, which hurt with a sharp pain, and saw that Sero's tape was stuck to his pant leg and shoe. "Uh-oh!" Izuku exclaimed as he arced closer to the dome. Now was not the time to marvel at Sero's skill. He engaged his levitation, which saved him from a nasty impact, and released it a moment later so he only dropped a couple of meters before hitting. From there, he used a utility knife from one of his pouches to cut the tape free, and slid down the outside of the dome and hit the ground with a thud. His leg and arm both hurt like hell, but he was still alive. He could see police cars and ambulances arriving around the front of the building, jogged around to them, limping a bit. "Izuku!" He skidded to a stop at the sound of his voice and scanned the sudden flood of people spilling out of the emergency vehicles everywhere. There was Sir hurrying towards him with an expression of enormous relief. "Sir!" Izuku said in relief. "You're injured," he said at once, signaling a paramedic over. "That's not important right now. Aizawa and 13, they're being tended to as we speak, already on the way to the hospital," he insisted. "Your turn." "But All Might's still in there, and he was already out of time before he even got here." Izuku kept his voice low, knowing it would be bad if anyone caught on. "Go with the medics, Izuku. I'll go check on Toshinori," Sir said firmly. "There's nothing you can do about it either way." The paramedic guided Izuku towards the back of an ambulance. "You can't take me to a hospital," he said to the paramedic firmly. "Your arm is obviously broken," the medic said. "Your leg should be x-rayed too." "Recovery girl will see to the boy's wounds," Principal Nezu said calmly as he approached, riding on the shoulders of the hero Snipe. "In fact, there is a ride waiting for him right now." Izuku thanked the medic and followed Nezu and Snipe to a large van with dark windows and gestured for him to get in. Cementos was behind the wheel and gestured for him to hurry. Izuku could see why. Sir and All Might, now in his diminished form, was sitting in the back, with Sir bracing his boss up with a hand on each shoulder. "Is it safe for me to be in here with him?" Izuku demanded, already reaching for the door handle. "It will be fine," Sir said curtly. "Please hurry, Cementos." Without further ado, Cementos hit the gas with a heavy foot and sped off towards the school. "Aizawa and 13 are being taken to the nearest hospital," Cementos told Izuku before he could ask. "We might have more information once you've seen Recovery Girl." Izuku didn't reply because he was carefully watching All Might for any sign at all that he might be in distress or weakening further. As soon as the van pulled up in front of the school, he could see that the nurse was already waiting with a pair of robots carrying a stretcher. Sir carefully guided an unsteady All Might onto it. "I'm going to go change clothes," Izuku said, "so that she can get him stable and settled before I go in." Sir paused, looking torn. Finally he nodded and turned to follow the nurse towards her office. "I'll come help you out," Cementos offered Izuku, walking with him to the changing rooms. "At least to get that boot off. I noticed you're limping." Izuku explained how he had been saved from a nasty fall for being levitated too high by Sero's quick thinking, but that it had jerked his leg pretty hard in the process. Cementos empathized and helped Izuku get his boot off, helped him unwrap Sero's tape, and made sure he was okay on his own for a few minutes before leaving him to change his clothes. Izuku took his time showering and putting on his school uniform to give Recovery Girl time to treat All Might first. He tried not to think of the rest. When he emerged from the changing room, Sir was standing in the hallway. "All Might is stable and sleeping," he told Izuku. "Your turn." Izuku nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him as he limped along beside his mentor. "Has there been any word about Sensei or 13? Izuku asked as they walked. The end of the school day had come and gone while Class 1A had been facing peril, so there were no students milling around, wondering what was going on. "It's too soon for that," Sir said quietly. "Recovery Girl can't even go work her magic until they're both strong enough for it. It's time to worry about yourself. I should have made you go straight away, but you seem to need some time to gather yourself." "I didn't know if All Might was so badly hurt that I could do him more damage by being near him." Sir sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose, making his glasses slide down a bit. "I told you before that you don't need to worry about that." "But what about the others? Were any of them hurt? Kurogiri sucked them up in a warp gate," Izuku insisted. "Is everyone accounted for? Did they catch Shigaraki and Kurogiri?" Shigaraki was taken away by Kurogiri, though Snipe swears he hit him several times with his shots. The other students are all accounted for and largely unharmed. The rest of the villains have been rounded up and taken into custody. That thing, the Nomu," Izuku said, gulping in air past the tightness in his throat. "Shigaraki said it was made for him and that I helped." Now that he had the time to slow down and consider the implications of that, he was beginning to feel nauseous. Sir looked at him sharply and paused mid-step for a moment as he realized what Izuku was telling him. "None of what happened today was your fault," he said firmly, though he sounded angry. "If what he said is true, it's not because of anything you did. He could very well have been lying to try and scare you into making a mistake." "But if they can make monsters out of blood or whatever else they took from me, what else can they do? They said they were going to kill All Might." "Izuku," Sir said, stopping to face him and make sure he was listening. "They wanted to kill All Might, true. They wouldn't be the first to try, and they failed, just like all of the others." Izuku took a calming breath and began to walk again as Sir led the way. "I just worry because he's so vulnerable now," Izuku said quietly. "I know he's not weak. He could never be weak, even if he didn't have anything of One for All left, but they don't know that. One of these times, he might not have enough to beat them." "That's true. That's why we're pinning our hopes and trust in you to do your best, so that when it's time, you can protect All Might from threats like this, instead of the other way around, right?" Sir didn't say it with any special intensity, but as a matter of fact he was stating, and simply reminding Izuku of what his goals were. "In the meantime, All Might, myself, and other heroes will hold the line while you learn what you need to know to take your place among the pro-heroes. That's our job, and you don't need to take over for us old folks quite so soon." Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. I love this AU of the USJ incident. It makes so much sense, and to the untrained ear, you wouldn't even know it wasn't the original. It gave me many emotions to deal with, which I am never afraid of portraying. I had such a great time with this chapter, so I hope all of you enjoyed listening to it. If you got this far in the video, tell me what your favourite autumnal drink is. Mine is probably hot chocolate or maybe even a chai latte. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of my next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah!